My name is Amira Osman. I'm joining you from South Africa. I wish you well in this conference. I wish I was able to join you. Unfortunately, I could not. But I am an architect. I have an interest in cities, how they come to be and how they are inhabited. I will be presenting, and let me share my presentation now. I will be presenting on open building explorations and applications in the African context, specifically looking at my experiences in South Africa. And I hope that it will have resonance for other places in the world as well. So South Africa is known by its very divisive apartheid planning. You can see some aerial imagery here showing you the stark difference between some settlements in South Africa, the lush green vegetation, the large plots on the left side, and quite harsh, bare, overcrowded environments on the right-hand side. You can see another example here of a shack settlement on the right next to a very lush and green golf course. And here you can see an informal settlement on the left, right next to a government planned or a planned settlement on the right, and then you can see the difference between them. So after apartheid, the intention was to provide as many people as possible with housing. And so the focus was very much on the numbers of houses delivered. These were always peripheral, and they were many times of very poor quality, and they were also all the same. And this is, of course, something that we as open building thinkers oppose very much, because it does not reflect the needs of individual families or groups or communities. We, as open building thinkers, we all know this metaphor, this inherited metaphor, where the built environment is seen as a crate with bottles with liquid, and that differentiates. And we saw that in text on the INO Hospital in Bern in Switzerland, where we separate between the system level, the primary system, secondary system, and the tertiary system. So in South Africa, we've actually used that as a metaphor to argue that government subsidies or government funding should rather be funding the crate, the overall settlement, the space in between, the neighborhood level, rather than funding the individual house unit through individual subsidies. We have also argued that funding needs to be differentiated in terms of personal funds, loans, other kinds of grants and government subsidies, in terms of what these funds are used for in the built environment. We argue that everything mustn't go into one pot and just provide a very standard kind of environment, but it needs to be used in a way to assist in distributed decision-making in the built environment. In my work, I often refer to Jane Jacobs' theories of organizing complexities, organizing complexity, Hamdi's small change, Kelvin Campbell's massive small, Alexander's patterns, Habroken's the urban field, and David Dewar, a South African planner, and his concept of negotiated reactions. And in my mind, this idea of negotiated reactions very well explains the idea of open building, distributed decision-making in a built environment. So what I often do is I analyze existing projects in terms of their capacity, the capacity for change that is built into the project design. This is an example of an analysis we did for buildings in Brazil. So not all practitioners use the term open building, but sometimes these projects do demonstrate that there's many aspects or qualities that could classify them as open building projects, and I'll elaborate a bit more. So here I identify what I mean by open building. So it's a separation between supports and infill, the relationship between what is shared and what can be independently decided per occupancy. It is also the disentanglement in design detailing, construction, and procurement. It is maximum capacity for adaptability of components of the built environment with a short lifespan and minimum disruptions to those components of the built environment that have a longer lifespan and that being shared are more difficult to change. It's also to do with systems or processes of development taking precedence over product design. In this video, this is a building in Pretoria where the architect kindly shared it with us, Earthworld architects, Andre Eksteen. And in this building, they do not use the term open building to describe their process, but it is very much a process of disentanglement, showing the circulation, but also showing the different components of the building and how each was conceptualized individually, the detailing, and also it showed how different participants could contribute to this. In this building, it was very deliberately done in such a way as to ensure that that different people could participate, that you could use small builders rather than big construction companies, and you could also use small emerging construction firms and community members to provide various components of the building. So while this is not classified by the architect as an open building project, it is very much applying the thinking of open building in the project. So open building is about how design decisions are separated and how a building is put together or assembled in terms of its long and short life components, and then the interface between these building components to allow for disassembly, replacement, upgrading. And this is one project also in South Africa, in the Cape, where this was achieved to some extent without specific reference to open building. This is another building in Latin America, in Peru, by Elemental, Alejandro Arevena, where the capacity to adapt and change and extent is built into the initial design, but again, no specific reference is made to open building. But this type of development in these type of contexts in the global south allow for income diversity, informal and formal developments happening together, upgrading, incremental development, and participation by everyday citizens and professionals alike. So these are some project examples from South Africa where we have taken the projects and analyzed them and tried to determine if we had changed the design slightly, and in some cases, it would need to change quite significantly to allow for change over time during the lifetime of the building, allowing for participants to participate in the decision making and adapting their homes to suit their changing life circumstances. So this is an example of how we do this analysis. We look at issues such as the load-bearing structures, secondary structures, doors and windows, building services, interior spaces, surfaces, components, etc. And so we take these buildings and we analyze them, and then we suggest if we had designed it, these are all social housing projects in South Africa. If we had designed it a little bit differently, this is what could have been achieved in terms of flexibility. So we have very specific concerns. On the left, you see a condition in a particular peripheral settlement in Pretoria, and how we then conceptualized the interventions that would need to happen to create more habitable open space and in-between space, what David Dewar refers to as the glue in between buildings. And we also then analyze the interface or the relationship between the buildings and the spaces around them. So on the right-hand side, you will see a typical house, top right there. You'll see the image of the house as it was, and you'll see how we designed it to extend it. This is a situation that is very common in South Africa, and where open building can be applied to allow for these extensions, but also to extend in such a way that the house can transform and change over its lifetime. We did this also in a rural development, which is being built currently in an area called Bushbuck Ridge, where the house, instead of being one solid block, it was separated into 3 components. It could become one family house, it could become 3 rental units, and the way that the building is designed is done in such a way to allow for some flexibility in the internal layout by the family. As I said, this is still on site. And also we have this building in Pretoria East, which is again a typical condition in South Africa. You can see bottom right here, under that big shed, that was the initial structure. It's a shack, a typical shack, typical to many informal settlements in South Africa. What we did, the first thing is we put a big shed over it, and then in collaboration with an industry partner, we started fixing the shack incrementally and putting in things like the water harvesting system, internal plumbing, and so on. So these are the lessons that I would like to share with you today. And if I may just also read some very brief principles upon which my work is based. So in the South African context, the aim is achieving mixed residential environments in terms of tenure, typology, income groups, functions, and densities. It's believed that this would generate vibrant, attractive, integrated environments in which the pedestrian is the priority. So open building here becomes a tool to manage complexity and diversity, and it assumes that the built environment should function as a total ecosystem. South Africa is a divided nation, as we saw with some of those initial images, because of its political history. So that's why this idea of integration, participation, creating humane settlements and multi-layered environments is so important. And to do that, we need to look at alternative mechanisms of delivery, finance, and design that acknowledge built environment levels and diverse agents of decision making. So in open building, the production of space in the built environment is understood as a social construct. And we need to understand the built environment as levels and diverse agents of decision making. And that's the only way we can achieve real participation. So in that sense, open building is highly relevant to the South African context, especially when we consider supports as government subsidized structures. So that what is used by the collective is what needs to be funded by government, as opposed to what is used by individuals or families, where we can look at alternative funding options, except in extreme cases where this is impossible. So I've shown that in my work, I analyze projects based on to what extent the design tasks are separated and how they are technically disentangled. And all of this really relates very strongly to self-built housing and informal settlements, upgrades, etc., issues that are very relevant in a South African context. So in this context, community engagement is a mechanism for empowerment and increased agency, especially considering the political history of South Africa, as mentioned now. And when the inhabitant is excluded, as we saw in some of the examples I showed, we achieve the result is uniformity and rigidity. And it's only when the individual and a family takes action that the result or participates, that the result reflects the aspirations of everyone. So we address the aspirations of the collective as well as the aspirations of the individuals. But if we leave everything to individual action, as we see in informal settlements, the result is chaos and a lot of conflict. So open building thinking in this and practice in these contexts is incredibly important. So we need to achieve a balance between order and choice, between the government and the public, between the process and product. I believe that the concept of open building is timeless and its principles are universal. They continue to relate to the state of the built environment globally and have special resonance for Africa and countries of the global South. I don't believe that open building should be a niche form of practice. I think it should be in some way a condition for developments, because I believe that allows for sustainability and long-term viability of the building stock. So the principle of distributed decision-making offers a mechanism by which voices that have been sidelined, excluded, and unheard may regain decision-making roles in the built environment. And with that, I conclude my talk. I hope you have a fantastic conference. Again, apologies I couldn't be there, and all the best for the rest of the conference. Thank you.